So we're here today. We're gonna talk about language, but first I want y'all to listen to this and tell me if you know what this means.
El día de hoy les vamos a hacer una presentación sobre el lenguaje.
Raise your hand if you know what that means. Anybody? All right. What about this one?
Hola.
Right. So raise your hand if you know what that means. So most of y'all know what that means. And the key difference here is obviously both of those statements were in Spanish, which probably isn't your first language. But what we're here to do is to take business communication and do the same thing. It's to make that transition between, even though it might not be your first language at this point, to really have you become more familiar with it like you do with the term hola, right? So we're going to talk about some key concepts in language and how that makes you a more effective communicator in the workplace. It's going to take us probably about 30 minutes. We'll have a small activity to do later on, about 10 minutes from now. That'll take about 8-9 minutes. But first, I'm going to pass it off to Marcella and let her get started. My name's Douglas Secrest, by the way. Alright, so as y'all can see with the words, with the different words emphasized, you change the question. The language of the sentence itself hasn't changed, but the pair language has. Pair language is the 9 nonverbal elements used to modify the meaning or convey emotions. So the big point here is to be an effective communicator. Not only do you have to pay attention to how or the question you ask, but you also have to make sure you understand the way you're asking the question. That's the part that often has the most perception. So when I say a same question different ways, you perceive it differently. So to be an effective communicator, we just need to understand how people can perceive what we say and the way we say it. So two more things about perception right quick is, one, there's a hypothesis that suggests the higher level thoughts you want are going to depend on your vocabulary or your language. So as we make our language wider or we diversify in our language, we're able to obtain a higher level of thought process. Think about it like, how many of y'all have taken biology? Okay, so how many of y'all have taken biology 2? So about half has been. So the people that took biology 2, just kind of envision this for a second. You walk into the biology 2 classroom and you've never taken biology 1 before, right? So all of a sudden you don't really understand what's going on in there, because that deeper thought process that's required of you in biology 2 is because you've learned the language of biology 1. That's kind of what this is dealing with. So in the workplace, to really be able to communicate with your management or your executive staff, you need to understand the language, understand the vocabulary, so that you can perceive what they're saying. You can understand what they're talking about. The second part here is that the increased vocabulary will increase your perception of the environment. And this kind of deals with more about accurately describing something. Take a look at this. So if we have six circles right here, right? So, and we're only given 2 words to describe these circles: large or small. Now, there's a ton of perception here. Almost everything except for, obviously, the largest ball here would be classified as large, and the smallest circle here would be classified as small. Other than that, it's all up to perception. So who here would classify 2 balls as large and 4 as small? Raise your hand. Okay, how many of y'all would classify 4 balls as large and 2 balls as small? Raise your hand. Okay, see, so it's perception. Some of us would, some of us wouldn't. I actually put 2 large, 4 small. But it's just the way I perceive it. If we look at the next one, and we're given 4 terms at this point. Now we have enormous, large, small, and tiny. Now there's less perception involved. So, of course, all of us are going to take the largest ball here and say it's enormous. We're going to take the smallest ball here and say it's tiny. Then most likely we're going to take this other circle here and say it's tiny as well. Then we're left with 3 balls. This one's obviously going to be large. This one's obviously going to be small. So now we have 1 circle left that's more of a perception. So the key point here is, you can see how I did it. Like I said, we have 1 large, 2 tinies, and then 1 large, that one small, and this was the one that was left up to perception. I said it was large. Somebody might say, no, it's small. But at least it's in this window within this grand scheme. So, like I said again, just to kind of summarize everything with perception and being effective as a communicator, is that the first thing we want to understand is our paralanguage. And that was our small activity. Just remember, it's not always what you say, but how you say it. The second thing is increase your vocabulary to obtain a deeper thought process. To become more intellectual in the workplace, you got to increase your vocabulary and your language of that environment. And the last thing with perception is to increase your language and your vocabulary so that you can accurately describe something. Like if your manager asks you about your accounts, you can give him, her an accurate description using a more diverse vocabulary. So now I'm going to pass it off to Peyton and let her summarize everything.